Hey guys, hope you all are doing well. So today we'll start with our topic, the ventricles of brain. So as there are three ventricles majorly of the brain, which is the lateral ventricles, the third ventricle, and the fourth ventricles of brain. So today we'll start with our topic, the third ventricle of brain. So before starting this topic belongs to neuroanatomy and it comes as a 15 marker or a 5 marker question. So if this question comes as a 15 marker question and it's a very important question, the third and the fourth ventricle are the two main questions which are asked in exam. So for a 15 marker question, how do you have to attempt this? First of all, you have to define what is third ventricle or fourth or the lateral ventricle, then write the function of the ventricle, then the communications along with its neat and labeled diagram, the recesses of the particular ventricle, the boundaries along with the diagram, and the clinical anatomy which is involved. So let's get started with the third ventricle. Before moving on to the third ventricle, we should know that what basically ventricles are and what are the functions of ventricles. So ventricles are basically the set of communicating cavities which are within the brain. Okay, so these are basically the communicating channels or the communicating cavities which is located inside the brain. So this is basically responsible for क्या करती हैं CSF की प्रोडक्शन करेंगे, रिमूवल of the CSF कर सकते हैं. So basically major advantage or you can say the major function is CSF की production हो गया, transport हो गया, removal हो गया, वो ventricles करते हैं. Now third ventricle. So first of all you should know कि हमारे ये तीन ventricles हैं and today we'll study the हमारा जो middle ventricle है which is the third ventricle. So these upper two are the lateral ventricles of the brain. Middle one is the third ventricle of the brain, and lowermost portion is the fourth ventricle of the brain. Fine. So third ventricle is basically a median cleft because it is a middle portion, okay, between the two ventricles, okay, which is anterior superiorly surrounded by the lateral ventricles, down and posteriorly it is surrounded by the fourth ventricle. So it is basically a median cleft, okay, which is present between the two thalamus. Fine. It is present in the diencephalon, which is CSF filled cavity. Fine. और इसका जो function है that is CSF release. Fine. अब जो third ventricle है along with the lateral ventricle and the choroid plexus CSF को release करता है. Fine. So this is the definition. It is the median cleft present in the diencephalon, which is the CSF filled cavity. Now this is a neat and a labeled diagram which is given in your books showing the ventricle seen from the lateral aspect, where the lateral ventricles are shown, the median part which is the third ventricle, and the fourth ventricle which is shown below. Okay. Then moving on to the communications. The communications of third ventricle, as I told, anterior superiorly, matlab uppermost part. I have shown you anterior superiorly. It is surrounded by the lateral ventricles, and posterior inferiorly it is surrounded by the fourth ventricle. So lateral ventricle anterior superiorly via the foramen of Monro. Fine, foramen of Monro. And posterior inferiorly via the cerebral aqueduct. So this is basically your cerebral aqueduct. Okay. Then this is also a neat and labeled diagram which is given in your books showing the ventricle seen from the ventral surface. Okay. So basically I told you that जो हमारा third ventricle है एक median cleft है which is anterior superiorly surrounded by the lateral ventricles, ठीक है, by the foramen of Monro, and posterior inferiorly via the cerebral aqueduct. It is related to the fourth ventricle. Now moving on to the recesses of third ventricle. So what does the word mean? Recess. Recess means that जो हमारी cavity है उसके जो extensions होते हैं, the extensions of the cavity is basically called as a recess. So हमारे majorly 5 or you can say 4 ऐसे recesses हैं जो हमारे third ventricle के होते हैं. So this all is your third ventricle. Fine. हमारा majorly जो recesses involved होते हैं, that is the suprapineal, ठीक है, then is our pineal recess, then is our optic recess, and चौथा जो main है, that is the infundibular process. Okay, these are the extensions of the cavities which are involved. Now talking about the boundaries which are related to the third ventricle. So एंटीरियरली बाउंड्रीज होती हैं, पोस्टीरियरली होती है, एक रूफ होता है, एक फ्लोर होता है और एक लैटरल बाउंड्रीज होती हैं. सो यहाँ पे एंटीरियर के सामने, पोस्टीरियर, रूफ, फ्लोर एंड लेटरल बाउंड्रीज के सामने आई हैव शोन अ कलर कोडिंग. दिस कलर कोडिंग इज बेसिकली, यहाँ पे मैंने इसको मार्क कर रखा है इन दिस पर्टिकुलर डायग्राम. पहले तो अगर हम बात करें ये boundaries of third ventricle, this whole diagram is given in your anatomy books. So यहाँ जो मैंने पिंक से लेबल कर रखा है, that are your recesses which I have shown you, the suprapineal recesses, the optic recess and the infundibular recesses. Now if we talk about the boundaries, so anteriorly, अब anterior portion में anterior की color coding here I have shown with the blue. So anterior की जो boundaries है, that is lamina terminalis, the fornix and the anterior commissure. So it is marked with blue. The anterior commissure here anteriorly. Okay. The lamina terminalis, this portion. So one is this portion, which is the anterior commissure, the lamina terminalis. Okay. And the fornix area. This part is the anterior column of the fornix. So these three are the anterior boundaries. Now coming on to the posterior boundaries. Posterior boundaries I have marked with color green. So it is the pineal body and the cerebral aqueduct. So posterior वाली obviously हमारी posteriorly होंगी. Anterior अगर आपका यहाँ है तो posterior will be this part ना. तो posteriorly हमारी एक pineal body है which is marked with green. And this portion which is the cerebral aqueduct which is marked with green color. So एक हमारा anterior part हो गया, एक हमने posterior part cover कर दिया. Now we'll cover the roof area. Above portion is the roof area. Lower ये वाला जो part है, this is the floor area. ठीक है, और जो हमारे thalamus वाला area है, that is the lateral portion. Fine. So coming on to the roof area, I have marked the roof area with yellow color. So roof area is the fornix, body of the fornix basically, the tila choroidea of the third ventricle and हमारा जो choroid plexus है. So ये हमने बात करी roof portion की. तो सबसे पहले हमने roof portion जो कहा, that was marked with yellow, which is the tila choroidea, this portion. Tila choroidea, roof, fine. Then I told you the fornix area, this one. सबसे ऊपर आपका fornix area आएगा, उसके बाद आपका टीला कोरोइडिया आएगा, देन ये जो आपको स्पाइरली स्ट्रक्चर दिख रहा है वो आएगा. दिस स्पाइरल स्ट्रक्चर इज द choroid plexus of the third ventricle. So this portion marks the roof of the third ventricle. Now talking about the floor, यहाँ पे ये वाला portion. So floor I have marked with orange color. The floor has optic chiasma, infundibulum, mammillary bodies, and the posterior perforated substance. So here is these structures are the posterior perforated substance. Then is the mammillary body, fine. And here with orange I have shown the infundibulum part, and this portion is the optic chiasma. फाइन. तो ये जो आपके लोअर पोर्शन आपको दिख रहे हैं ऑप्टिक क्यास्मा से शुरू होके आपके पोस्टीरियर परफोरेटेड सब्सटेंस, दीज आर योर फ्लोर एरियाज. नाउ लेटरल पोर्शन की बात करते हैं, विच आई मार्क्ड विद पर्पल कलर. So it is the thalamus or the hypothalamic sulcus. Fine. So सबसे पहले तो ये जान लो, ये आपका थैलेमस पार्ट है, एंड ये जो आपको नीचे स्ट्रक्चर दिख रहा है, this part is known as the hypothalamic sulcus. So these are your lateral boundaries. So anteriorly आपकी यहाँ थी, posteriorly आपकी बैक साइड पे, रूफ आपका ये था, दिस पोर्शन, एंड लैटरली आपका थैलेमस एंड जो हमारा थैलेमिक स्ट्रक्चर है हाइपोथैलेमिक वो आएगा. So these were the boundaries of the third ventricle. Now talking about the last part, which is the clinical anatomy of the third ventricle. So clinical anatomy is basically अगर हमारे third ventricle, क्योंकि third ventricle is basically a narrow space, so कई बार there is problem within the third ventricle, that there is obstruction. So if the third ventricle is obstructed by, suppose for example, by brain tumors, so what does it further cause? It can cause increase in the intracranial pressure in adult patients, hydrocephalus in infant patients, and hypothalamic symptoms भी हो सकते हैं जैसे कि diabetes and obesity. So this was all about your third ventricle. Hope you liked the video. If you liked my video, hit a thumbs up. Do share my videos, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon, and please wait for my next upcoming videos. Thank you. Have a nice day.